Welcome, everybody. Hopefully the others will show up here very shortly. Thank you very much for coming. Short notice. Today we have Lieutenant General Christine Whitecross and Rear Admiral Jennifer Bennett to give us an update on sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. So thank you again for appearing in front of the committee today. I understand that there's been a couple updates since the Deschamps report of 2015, one very recently in August. So having said all that, before I give you the floor, General Whitecross, just for the committee, I'm going to save 10 minutes at the end for committee business. So we'll have testimony, questions, and then we'll save 10 minutes for committee business. So having said that, thank you for coming. And General Whitecross, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, honorable committee members, je vous remercie de cette invitation.
Thank you for this invitation to appear before the Committee on National Defence to update you on the Canadian Armed Forces response to the problem of harmful and inappropriate sexual behavior.
Jennifer Bennett, who is leading the Canadian Armed Forces Strategic Response Team on Sexual Misconduct. I have addressed this committee on this issue before on May 25th, 2015, less than a month following our receipt of the former Supreme Court Justice Madame Marie Deschamps' seminal report and recommendations. At that time, I mapped out the initial actions of the Canadian Armed Forces was undertaking or intended to quickly undertake to address this insidious problem, as well as our intent to focus on four main areas in developing a solution: understanding the problem, responding to it, supporting those affected by it, and ultimately preventing it. I'm pleased to report that we have made significant progress since that time, and at the end of August, we released our second progress report outlining the efforts of the 6 previous months, as well as our challenges and mitigating strategies on the way ahead. Mr. Chair, as you well know, General Vance has made this issue one of his top priorities and launched Operation Honor, the overarching endeavor aimed at eliminating harmful and inappropriate sexual behavior within our institution. A focal point of Operation Honor is the implementation of all 10 of Madame Deschamps' report's recommendations, though the efforts are not limited to those. The objective is clear: to eliminate harmful and inappropriate sexual behavior in order to ensure the dedicated men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces are treated with dignity and respect in a workplace free from harassment and discrimination. Delivering more effective support to victims remains Operation Honor's first objective. Last September, the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, the SMRC, was established, independent from the military chain of command, to provide Canadian Armed Forces members affected by sexual misconduct with an additional, confidential, and unique support option. One of the attributes that makes the center different is that it allows victims to speak to counselors while deciding whether or not to actually pursue a formal complaint. Nous savons que la peur des effets indésirables,
Fear of adverse effects and a lack of knowledge or trust in the system are considered impediments to victim reporting, and we continue to overcome these barriers. Thus, we have seen an increase of 22% of incidents reported to the military police in the first 6 months of this year.
cases predating Operation Honor. This demonstrates to us that some of these victims now believe, perhaps for the very first time, that we will hear them and we will actually take action. Important enhancements are underway within the military police branch and the Judge Advocate General to improve victim support as well as investigations and prosecutions. On Tuesday of this week, we announced and launched our new sexual offense response teams, composed of specially trained investigators located at bases and wings across the country. Every report of a sexual offense, new or historical, will be investigated by these dedicated teams within the Canadian Forces National Investigative Service. Independent of Operation Honor, military judicial processes are also being reviewed and assessed with victim support as the central theme for this work. Measuring progress is pivotal in determining the impact of our efforts. While the number of reports, investigations, charges, and convictions are important performance measures, it is ultimately the Canadian Armed Forces members who will determine the extent of our success and the organizational culture change that it delivers. This past spring, Statistics Canada conducted a survey of regular force and primary reserve members at our request to specifically address the incident of and response to harmful and inappropriate sexual behavior. Over 40,000 of our members completed the survey, and the results will be released at the end of November. Nous prévoyons que ces résultats.
We expect that these results will be very revealing, and they will provide us with the valuable information we need to better understand the scope and nature of sexual misconduct in the military context. We also believe we will learn about areas to target for successful cultural change and understand the challenges our members face.
Responsibility and accountability of every member to live up to the values of respect and honor upheld by the Canadian Armed Forces is the cornerstone of a culture change being generated by Operation Honor. This is a long-term endeavor and one of the most difficult leadership challenges an organization can undertake. We know that we are only at the very beginning of a very long and complex journey. However, we are seeing evidence of change generated at all levels of the institution. Momentum is building. Our challenge today is to maintain it. The Canadian Armed Forces must protect and care for its members. We must be an employer of choice, despite the reality of sending people in harm's way, and should be respected not only for what we accomplish, but for what the Canadian Armed Forces is and what we represent. This can only be sustained if the institution diligently works to ensure a professional environment of dignity, respect, and the elimination of sexual misconduct. The Chief of the Defence Staff, General Vance, and my fellow institutional leaders are encouraged by the progress achieved to date, but we are not completely satisfied. Much work remains, and despite the early progress and changes within our institution, incidents of harmful sexual behavior and sexual offenses continue to occur. This is why Operation Honor remains a top priority across the Canadian Armed Forces. The institution will be judged not on promises and plans, but on our demonstrated ability to deliver the cultural change that Operation Honor intends to achieve. Voilà pourquoi nous demeurons.
That is why we remain deeply committed to ensuring a dignified environment, respectful and professional, to all Canadians who choose to serve their country. And why, in the eyes of all the members of the Canadian Forces, Operation Honor is a no-fail mission.
Thank you very much, General Whitecross. Before we take our first question, I wanted to congratulate you on your recent appointment to the NATO College in Rome. We're all very proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very exciting.
Our first question is going to go to Mr. Spigman. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, General Whitecross, Admiral Bennett. Thank you both for your service, for your leadership, for being here today, and most importantly, for engaging on this very, very important topic. I want to put to you the idea that investigation, discipline, and victim support are tremendously important components of the project overall, but they are what we might consider the downstream components that happen when something bad has occurred. So you mentioned culture change, and about an hour ago I had the opportunity to introduce my private member's bill in the House of Commons, and it's an act to create Gender Equality Week in Canada. And it's a bill for which I'm looking to feedback and also ultimately support from the Canadian Forces as it goes forward. But I'm wondering if you could take the lens of gender equality, which is something maybe more diffuse, but certainly upstream of sexual misconduct and sexual violence, and illuminate the committee and Canada as a nation a little bit on the culture that is currently in place in the Canadian Forces that we need to change, the subtleties that would facilitate sexual misconduct, sexual violence, and ultimately all the things that we report on and try to correct.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, I'm going to do some of the answers of the questions, and then I'll defer to Jennifer Bennett, who is working the issues on a day-to-day basis. I'd like to say, first of all, that a week, as you've so illustrated, characterized, would certainly be supported by the Canadian Armed Forces. General Vance has made it one of his priorities, besides Operation Honors, also to increase the diversity numbers within the Canadian Armed Forces, and that is certainly one of my objectives as well. And in so doing, we're talking about cultural change, which will take a generation or more, as you can appreciate. In addition to that, what we're trying to do in the short term, as you've alluded to, is bring out the behavioral change. Behavioral change in the short term will lead to cultural change in the long term. But institutionally, we must create the environment where culture change and behavioral change will be sustaining and enduring, which speaks to policies, training, education, and a marked change in probably how we treat people when it comes to men and women, people of different sexual orientations, and different cultures, actually, if we can put it to that extent. So the work we're doing on the institutional side, which is very much process-driven, which is very much going to create that environment, is ongoing, and Admiral Bennett could actually speak a little bit more on that. Would like to also mention that gender-based analysis has to be a part of our processes as we're moving forward. And General Vance has identified Major General Tammy Harris as the gender-based analysis champion for the Canadian Armed Forces. And we're taking the lead on that to look at our policies to ensure that there is no gender bias in our policies as we're moving forward, and that we're looking at them in a very constructed or structured and pragmatic way. So putting that all together, that will help to bring us to a sustained, our belief is that will help bring us to a sustained cultural change. And much of that has already been started.
General, before we hear from Admiral Bennett, is it fair to say that aside from the policies, which are very much going in the right direction as I see it, there isn't at the moment among our serving women and men a presumption of gender equality across functions in the Canadian Forces? That's still not something that's culturally established? Or is that too general a statement?
I think that's too general a statement, Mr. Chair, and I certainly, on my own personal opinion, I believe that I get treated as a peer based on my rank and my experience and background level. I would like to think that is the case for all, but I'm not naive enough to believe that. Okay. So I believe we do have work to do there. Okay.
Admiral Bennett, would you like to comment as well?
If I could address your last question first, I think there's a difference between gender equality and equity. And while we don't have the same balance of male members of the Canadian Armed Forces and female members, there are some differences in why people choose to join the Canadian Armed Forces. There is a propensity to join factor, and we share that challenge across a number of occupations that have been traditionally male-dominated. I would also add that we do have pay parity benefit. We do have a number of our programs that are exactly the same for men and women, which is not the case across other occupations. So it is difficult to answer the question about gender equality if you're simply just looking at numbers there. Certainly our programs and the way that we treat individuals is very gender neutral. Okay. Even our physical fitness standards now, we've gone to one standard for all so that it applies to members of the Canadian Armed Forces to ensure that we are fit for operations. There are no different standards for men than there are for women. Okay. In terms of the cultural change, and with your specific reference to gender considerations, Operation Honor touches on a number of other large projects across the department. General Whitecross mentioned diversity. We continue to work on our ethics and ethos, our programs of leadership, gender considerations on operations as part of the UN Security Resolution and the NATO work. So we are engaged across a number of initiatives that are gender-related, and I'm excited as well to hear about the opportunity to be able to celebrate Gender Equality Week and the role that we can play in that.
Thank you for that. Mr. Chair, do I have time left?
You've got about a minute 15.
Very briefly, perhaps, just to look at two separate stages in the process of entering and serving in the Canadian Forces. What messaging with respect to gender equality is taking place at the recruitment stage and in our military colleges? I know that doesn't leave a lot of time, but if you could just briefly address, and maybe we can circle back to it.
So whether it's recruiting or two parts to that question. One, we're trying to increase our diversity numbers. That is one of our ultimate aims in the next number of years. And the CDS has made 1% per year for the next 10 years to be our stated aim so that we can make our target numbers from the Human Resources Canada up to 25% in the next decade. In order to do that, we are creating the environment at the recruiting centers before they even get to the military colleges and the recruit school in Saint Jean. We're creating the environment where we're trying to get engage more women, specifically women, but also people of visible minorities and our Aboriginal colleagues, to engage them more, to tell them of the benefits that exist within the Canadian Armed Forces, and to expand upon them, because we found in our public opinion research that women generally don't understand what it means to be a military member, and to do a far more education at the grassroots level.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much. Mr. Pullis, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. General Whitecross, Rear Admiral Bennett.
Si vous voulez, monsieur, vous pouvez commencer.
Okay.
We've been talking about behavior and environment, but the primary cause of the cases of harassment or aggression. I was a member of the forces for 20 years. I was the commander of a group, and I had to deal with problems such as this at the time, but I started making use, I think at the end of the 1980s, when the Charter of Right was more actively implemented and the integration of women in combat units took place. We lived through we went from a world that was made up of men, almost exclusively men, and this did result in a change of culture at the time. And the change that we've observed, and this is something that I'd like to understand, at the present time, today then, has there been an increase in the number of assaults? And would you say that the behavior of young people nowadays is similar to what is taking place with the type of environment in civil society, which is more permissive than it once was? And I have a number of questions here, and I'm interested in knowing whether the imposition of discipline within the Canadian Armed Forces has changed. There was a time when soldiers had to face consequences, very serious consequences, when they engaged in certain types of acts. Would you say that the officers are not as tough in dealing with the soldiers, and this may result in certain changes?
So quite a few questions in there. If I can take them one at a time. First, in terms of the sexualized culture, reality is Canadian Armed Forces isn't the only people that are that have this type of behavior that we're trying to address. It exists in civil society, universities and colleges across the country, not to mention other government departments, and our allies. It is a severe issue as well that is facing our allies. And we discuss that in terms of bringing up best practices as much as possible in amongst the countries and in amongst organizations here within Canada. And the reality is we're bringing in young people who are part of that society into our organization, and we need to inculcate them in what it means to be a military member as soon as possible when they come in. That starts at the recruiting centers. So at the recruiting centers, this is discussed openly with every member that wants to be a member, and they're expected to sign a form that basically says that they agree that this behavior shouldn't be taken. So that sexualized culture exists, and our job is, in my humble opinion, is to ensure that Canadian Armed Forces members realize that they need to be held to a higher standard. This is a firm belief of military ethos, as you're aware, and that we need to ensure that that's at the forefront, which I'll go to your third question, which has to do with discipline and such. I don't believe that I believe that there are a number of chains of command out there that are wanting to do the right thing. And we see it today. We see it more today than we have in the past because there is a big spotlight on people that are doing this types of behavior. But I must admit, in my town halls, as when I went across the country, that wasn't necessarily always the case. And it hasn't been the case in some areas. Not everywhere. But the reality is that some people have turned a blind eye, and we need to address that as a matter of course. So the change of culture in the Canadian Armed Forces, we've been talking about it for a long period of time. We say it's going to take a long time. It is one of the largest challenges that we have in getting rid of this insidious behavior. It's really fundamentally changing people's ideals of what is and is not appropriate behavior. We don't have stats that go back years and years. Unfortunately, information comes to us from a great many sources. Today, the SMRC, the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, comes to us from the MPs, from the Health Services Group. We get some anecdotal stuff from our padres. We also get it from the Ombudsman. We get it from chains of command. So a whole bunch of plethora of avenues. And today we're trying to amalgamate all of that information so that we have a clearer picture. Stats Canada survey that we had contracted for earlier this year will give us a baseline indication of where we are today and where we have been in the last number of months. But it will not give us a strong indication of where we've been 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So we're working very much today because to identify how we're getting better, we need to be able to show that tangibly. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
Just to add that our approach has changed considerably from the 1980s. Both General Whitecross and I were members of the Canadian Forces then. Our approach to addressing the concern at that time was sort of one prong, training. We felt that if we trained people about what was right and what was wrong, it would fix the problem. We've made a great deal, a more comprehensive approach to this now, and that includes the use of both disciplinary measures and administrative measures and holding leaders to account. Because General Vance made this endeavour an operation, he has given orders to the Canadian Armed Forces, and he has made those orders and expectation very clear at all levels. And so now leaders are held to account for lack of action in their units or at their level. And we are tracking this, and we are reporting. There have been people removed from positions of command and supervisory position. There have been charges laid, and we've had 8 convictions in the period January to June for sexual-related offences. And we've taken administrative measures as well that include not just the corrective and remedial measures, but release from the Canadian Armed Forces and career action. So a much more comprehensive and serious approach at all levels that is also holding leaders to account.
Okay.
May I add one more, Mr. Chair? One more small point?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
And that is when we're talking about sexual misconduct to the extreme, which is sexual assault, that is a very intimate violence in most cases, between 2 people, men, women, matters not. And the issue at place there is having trust that the system will take care of you when it's your word against someone else's. And so encouraging people to report, and so you talk about the disciplinary system in that, encouraging people to report and giving them the confidence that the chain of command is going to do the right thing is another challenge that we have, and we encourage people to report as much as possible.
Mr. Garrison, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and of course I want to extend a warm welcome to both Rear Admiral Bennett and Lieutenant General Whitecross. And also congratulations on your new appointment, General Whitecross. I'll try not to view it as a loss for us, but a gain for Canada on the world stage. But I want to make a remark at the beginning about the seriousness of this problem. I was at NATO Parliamentarians Association reception just this week, where one of the participants, one of our allies, opened his remarks with a quote-unquote rape joke. And I think it indicates the severity of the sexualized culture and the mountains that you have to climb here. I am going to ask some fairly serious questions, but I do think it's important to say that I think there are many things that are going very well and that are quite worthy of praise. I appreciate the seriousness with which the leadership is taking this question, and we've moved a long ways from when people said that the policy was zero tolerance, because zero tolerance is always an aspiration and never a policy. And certainly, as Rear Admiral Bennett just mentioned, the shift in emphasis to include more extensive measures. What you didn't mention was the emphasis on support to victims, which I think was lacking in the past, and I really welcome that. Changing culture is not an easy task, and I do recognize why your emphasis is right now focused very much on serving members, but I want to ask about some other related areas of concern. And I want to ask about cadets, families living on base, civilian employees, and if there's time, some reserves. So let me start with cadets. We have 50,000 cadets, more than 50,000 cadets in programs across the country, and that's a very positive thing and something I hope that we can expand. But we have some concerns because of some high-profile incidents. I have had concerns from parents about placing their kids in cadets. And so I guess my question is, have questions of harassment and sexual assault been integrated into the orientation and training for cadets themselves? And the second question is, are there special outreach provisions for cadets who may be the targets of harassment and assault? Because we know this goes on everywhere in society. Nothing special about cadets that would mean it wouldn't go on there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and we're very honored to have Admiral Bennett as part of our group because, as you're aware, she actually helped run the Reserve and Cadet program. So I'll ask her to speak on the specifics. I just want to add that whether the cadet program, which is overseen by the Canadian Armed Forces, is still bound by duty and respect for all. And our premise is that they will follow, whether it's the cadet leaders or the volunteers, that people will follow suit on the objectives of Operation Honor, in addition to people, men and women that work on bases and wings across the country, and our reserve colleagues. Jennifer?
Thank you very much for your question and the opportunity to speak. While I'm not currently in charge of the portfolio, I am very well aware of the programs for the two youth programs, so the Junior Canadian Rangers in addition to the cadets. And the programs are somewhat unique because of the environment and the communities from which those participants are drawn. In the cadet program, for both cadets and Junior Canadian Rangers, while they are not members of the Canadian Armed Forces, we are entrusted with their care, and that is a responsibility that we hold most dear and we take very seriously, and that we realize families put their trust in us to lead them. So from the outset, there is extensive screening for all volunteers, adults who work with the program, whether they're members of the Canadian Armed Forces or civilian volunteers. There's also specialized training that has been created. A new program created in the last 2 years called Social Relations Training is now mandatory for all cadets and adult leaders. And that training was designed to enhance awareness and understanding, to encourage action and reporting, and to facilitate some of the existing harassment training that has been existing in both programs. The Junior Canadian Ranger program has a different network of support options based at the community level because of the differences there with police and community health services. There are special outreach programs provided at the community level before incidents occur, awareness training for both cadets and Junior Canadian Rangers, but also before summer camp and at the camps. Because the majority of cadets are youth and therefore underage, our programs the information is protected, the cadets are protected, and extra care is given to ensure that the care is appropriate, not only for that cadet, but for other members of the corps and squadrons and their families. So quite a variety of extensive programs from the training, the awareness, and the support programs.
Thanks very much. I also want to acknowledge that there's been some very creative work done in cadets on accommodating transgender cadets, and it's world leading. My second question is about families on base, and especially children on base. And there's been some confusion over the years about who has jurisdiction in cases of harassment or assault when it's non-serving family members on the base, and in particular minors on the base. Is this a responsibility of the civilian police or the military police? And the military's had a spotty record in the past in terms of its handling of domestic violence and sexual assaults against children because of this jurisdictional problem, I think, largely. So I guess whose responsibility is it to protect kids living on base? And are the services of the Sexual Misconduct Response Center available to families? And that would be my question.
Thank you, sir. So the Sexual Misconduct Response Center takes calls from all of the people, as you saw from their progress report. They take calls from military, civilian members, public servants, family members, cadets. Though our priority right now in Operation Honor is to deal with military members, they take calls from these people and they help facilitate support that they need. So they would never just let them take their numbers. They actually try to facilitate assistance as much as possible. In terms of jurisdiction, our military police on bases and wings across the country have relationships with all of the civilian police departments or the federal police department, depending on where they are. In the cases where they are only military because they're out by themselves, say they're on deployment or whatever, then obviously it resides within the military police purview. However, if it has to do with non-military members, they actually try, as long as there are civilian police in the local area, they put the file over to the civilian police, and then they work in consultation in order to be able to effect whatever needs to be done for that situation. In the grand majority of cases across the country, those jurisdictions will go to the civilian police.
Thank you.
And that's time.
Hopefully we'll get another round. I have the other questions I'd like to ask. Thank you very much.
Mr. Garrettson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and General Admiral, thank you very much for your work on this. It's not obviously an easy subject to tackle, but I admire your willingness and passion to do it. I represent a riding that Kingston and the Islands, which has CFB Kingston in it, and I've born and raised in Kingston. I've seen and had many friends whose parents have been in the military, and I've been quite exposed to the culture that exists within the military. And I know of the subordinate nature of that culture, of the ranking in that culture. And and quite often, even what I would see within the community, even when there were matters that took place off the base, I've anecdotally at least heard of instances where proper repercussions were handled even within the military structure, even though those individuals were in the broader community at the time. So I understand and appreciate the rich sense of discipline that is ingrained within the culture of the military. And I'm curious, and I recognize the fact that you say that the culture will take a long time to change, generations. But how do you crack that nut of encouraging people to come forward, to voice their concerns, to file their complaints, but still represent or still appreciate the discipline that exists between the different levels of command? How do you ensure that the culture can be adapted appropriately to still respect that discipline, but still ensure that individuals will be treated with the respect and the seriousness of their matters as they're concerned, especially when that culture has so ingrained in it a sense of, we will handle this, the next rank up will handle this. You know, I've been dealing with the issue in my riding of the Phoenix pay system. I have a lot of military personnel, and I have a lot of corrections personnel as well from Corrections Canada. The ones that come banging on the door at my office are the corrections, because they know when they need to, they'll make noise. Military respect the cultural or the discipline of reporting to your superior. And I'm curious if you can expand on that.
Thank you, sir. I would submit that there's more than one culture in the Canadian Armed Forces. There are cultures depending on your occupation, depending on you're in the Air Force or the Navy or the Army, whether you're a soft Special Operations Force. There are cultures depending on if you're an officer or an NCM. But the two specifics that you're addressing, if I may, One has to do with our culture of a hierarchical system, which is very much who we are, where you know where you are in that proverbial totem pole, and you know your roles and responsibilities based on your position and your rank. And your responsibilities as a supervisor, which is to the heart of what Madame Deschamps has said in her report, which I'll go to the sexualized culture in just a moment. The heart of her report is that the people in the chain of command, not in every case, but in the cases that she's aware of, did not do the right thing. So that culture, that hierarchical culture, that is the backbone of military cultures around the world, in this respect is broken, in that people are not taking account for what their people are doing, or when someone does come forward, has not done the right thing. And again, not in all cases. I don't want to broad brush, certainly those who are doing the right work and doing the right thing. So when General Vance determined that he needed to give orders to the Canadian Armed Forces, Operation Honor, he did that in that premise, that as military members, of which I understand a number of you have been, we understand what orders are. And the orders are that the chain of command will take care of their people. Now, one could argue that that should never have to be an order because it's implicit. But in this particular case, as it goes to that sexualized culture, the requirement for an order is there. And to ensure that people are aware of what is and is not going to be appropriate or put up with by the chain of command.
Okay,
And
thank
so-
you.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. There's one other part that I want to touch on before I run out of time. And in the scope of Operation Honor and sexual misconduct in particular, a lot of the discussion focuses on women and the way that they're being treated at times inappropriately. And I think that's justified. I also represent RMC, and I had the great pleasure of serving on a city council in Kingston with one of the first female cadets in the first year. So I've heard about some of the horror stories that can exist in that male versus female relationship. But I think that the reality of the matter is that there's also sexual misconduct between males at times. And can you expand on how Operation Honor will also ensure to protect those individuals as well?
So I think we've made it clear, not just in the town halls, but in Operation Honor Nexus, that it's every member of the Canadian Armed Forces, man, woman, regardless of their sexual orientation, will be treated with due dignity and respect. And in Madame Deschamps' report, she did speak predominantly of women, but she also spoke about male-on-male rape and a couple other things specifically to do with male or the LGBTQ community. Our premise is that every single person, as a standard, must be treated the same. So we go back to the gender-based analysis, the unbiased assumptions that people make based on what they look like and the like, and then ensure that our policies, our training, and everything else actually goes
and that's where I
towards
was
that.
going with it. Will the training and the not necessarily the policies, because those are overarching, but will the actual training be to the benefit of
Absolutely.
also the perhaps male on male?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Thank you,
sorry.
Mr. Chair. I think that's just about said.
Could I add, just to reassure you, we are consulting with current peer support groups and advocates for male support groups, male survivors. We have been working quite extensively to gather training resources as well to ensure that we are covering the diverse range, and that is included in our victim testimonials, in our training scenarios, that yes, this is not a gender-based, specific to women challenge that we have.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We're going to move to 5-minute questions now, and Ms. Ellslev, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming today. What an honor to have you here. I can't help but notice, though, that the leadership roles in this particular initiative, including the gender-based analysis that you made mention of earlier, are all women. Is it possible that that could be interpreted as being a women's issue that can be solved by women and not something that perhaps male officers, of which there are significantly higher percentage in the Canadian Forces, should concern themselves with?
That's a very good point. And I would add, when I was first named to lead the effort, it was something I had to deal with myself. In the eyes and ears of the Canadian public, perhaps I was the spokesperson on this, what I would term insidious behavior. But when I took a step back and realized that I personally, I'm just going to speak about me and then I want to speak about my colleagues, am so passionate and dedicated to effecting change on this, I stand here in the belief that I'm the right person and Jennifer is the right person to take it in the first initial stages. So two additional points. General Vance has made it very clear it is his priority. He is the spokesman. This is his issue, and he leads it for the Canadian Armed Forces. He has ensured that every one of his direct reports, so my colleagues at the Lieutenant General rank, also have to own this, and they need to own it throughout their ranks. Institutionally, Jennifer and I are taking, Admiral Bennett and I are taking care of the institution, training, education policies. But when it comes down to leadership and the command and control issues, that is done by every single one of my colleagues and my peers, right through down to the lowest level, men and women in command.
And thank you. And please don't misunderstand me. It was no way
I
a question of your capability or the job that you have been doing, which is outstanding. However, it can be misinterpreted, perhaps, that while the General Vance is taking it seriously, he also is the Chief of the Defense Staff and perhaps other things on his plate as well as this, right? I know that you have focused on understanding the problem and then responding to the incidents, and then, of course, supporting victims and then prevention. You've stated that you are making significant progress, but I would like to understand what the key metrics are in each of those categories that you're using to define that progress that you're making. I was an officer in the Canadian Forces. I was at a Royal Military College in Kingston, and back in 1998, I was able to be trained under SHARP, which was then a significant program around harassment and racism, which included gender equity. I was just at my 25th reunion and speaking with some of the cadets there, and it's difficult to know what progress has been made. So I think I'd like to understand from you what those significant metrics, measurable outcomes that you're using to be able to define progress.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if I can just defer to Admiral Bennett. She's working the actual metrics issue, and she'll be able to provide you more detail.
So thank you for that question. That is one of our greatest challenges, and we realize that it's easy to demonstrate intent and action. It's outcomes. It's the so what. We're only at the beginning of that stage, and so a great deal of our measurement at this point is anecdotal as we look at what is the impact that we're having. And the first line that you spoke about, understanding, is still ongoing. That's engaging our institution for a better understanding of the scope and the nature of the problem. But we're finding that the conversations are changing at the base and wing level. This topic is being more openly discussed. We're getting more questions and inquiries through my team, through the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, people asking questions, asking for resources to better understand.
So then that's something that we would probably see the actual metrics and outcomes as you develop them later.
So the Statistics Canada survey will give us a baseline about prevalence and about awareness and understanding. We've also changed and developed specific metrics for recruits, for cadets in both of the military colleges. We're doing our unit climate surveys. We're enhancing a number of our current measurement strategies that we have, but also having that discussion. We will then look at retention, recruiting, a number of factors, but we're only beginning.
And that's the next piece of my question, if I could quickly.
Actually, your time's up there.
Okay, there you go.
I'd like to thank you for the question and the answer. I'd like to give the floor over to Mr. Bazan. You have the floor.
Thank you, and it's great seeing you again, General Waycross and Admiral Bennett. Thank you for your service and the service that you're providing right now to the members of the Canadian Armed Forces. This is an important role that you're playing, and although Operation Honor is the CDS's operation and leadership, you're the ones that are implementing it and making sure that the rules are being followed. Now, I want to touch on one of the comments that was already made about the disciplinary actions that have been taken. And I think some of us would be interested in what type of disciplinary actions, as just maybe some examples have been taken against those that have perpetrated sexual misconduct and sexual assaults, and also what actions have been taken against those that were in the chain of command that really failed the victim or turned a blind eye, as you put it, to this insidious behavior.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'm going to ask Jennifer to speak on that. We actually have some information that we can provide to you, and perhaps afterwards we'll be able to provide you a paper copy of some updates.
So, as I mentioned earlier, there have been a series of summary trials and courts-martials as well. The courts-martial results are publicly available, and the Provost Marshal and the JAG both have annual reports in which they report on investigations and as well the findings in charges and our judicial system. There has been one commanding officer relieved of command, one RSM relieved, 15 members have been relieved from supervisory or instructional positions in the period between April and September. They, in addition to the charges and the convictions that we've had through the summary trial and court-martial, there are a number of court-martials pending for sexual-related offences. And in terms of the administrative, or in terms of the fines and the punishments for that, they have ranged from all the way from imprisonment and released from the Canadian Armed Forces to fines in accordance with the scale of punishment. Not all of those charges were necessarily for sexual assault. Some were for conduct related to sexually related behavior and inappropriate behavior. In terms of the administrative action, those range again from what can be recorded warnings and action on file to career action. It is a progressive process in that case, and in those cases we have taken action to relieve people from supervisory roles, as I said, to lay charges when there has been an offence, to make records on people's file that will impact their career progression or potentially succession planning, and in some cases release from the Canadian Armed Forces.
I know one of my concerns is when we started down this path that in Operation Honor in particular, that upper management will understand what they need to do and try to implement it, especially with the strong directive that came from the CDS. My concern was what's going to happen to middle management. What about the petty officers, warrant officers, sergeant majors, master corporals? Are they getting it? And do you think the disciplinary actions that have been taken are sending the message that this culture or the sexual culture that did exist within some segments of the Canadian Armed Forces is being quashed?
Sir, I can tell you that the middle managers, certainly the chief warrant officers, are getting the message down to the people, to the other ranks. Chief Warrant Officer West and a number of the other level 1 chief warrant officers, so mine and other ones, the Commander of the Army, for example, they speak at the training that is required by all senior NCOs in order to be able to get promoted. And they speak it to them on a monthly basis. They go over to Saint Jean where the courses are being held, and they speak very openly on this particular subject. When it first started, a little over a year ago, when they would go there and speak, there was a lot of comments, incredulous, non-belief kind of comments. Today, that's completely turned around. People are listening. They're providing anecdotes of what has happened. They're asking for advice on what they should do if they have been put into a particular situation. So the conversation itself has actually turned around. That's taken a number of months, I'll grant you that. But I think that's actually a good anecdotal measurement of where we are.
And my final question before I run out of time,
20 seconds.
20 seconds. General Whitecross, you traveled to a number of our allies to look at how they dealt with sexual misconduct before we stood up the Sexual Misconduct Response Center. Do you feel you got the right mix of tools to provide the support that we need to victims, as well as investigate any allegations that come forward? And Admiral Bennett, do you feel that you have what you need to do the job that's been tasked to your office?
Thank you, sir. So, in terms of the visits around the couple of our allied nations, they made it very clear that our very first priority must be the victims, which is what we brought back with us. They also said, take your time to do it right. So I would venture to say, as the minister mentioned a little while ago, or a member mentioned a little while ago about the SHARP program. Perhaps it was the right thing at the time, but it didn't have other things around it. It wasn't bred into a sustainable, enduring focus on this inappropriate behavior. So their comment was, make sure what you do today will be there tomorrow and will exist for years to come. So we're taking that very much in hand. And the comment about helping the victims, number one priority, creating a center where they can go to, that was made very, very clear to us. Now, center itself, the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, it's not at its final operating capability. It still needs to, based on the calls that it's getting, it still needs to do a lot of analysis and research. Should they increase its hours? Should they increase the number of counselors that they have? Should they actually seriously be satellite units, maybe in other regions across the country? So we're still doing that type of work. The service that they're providing now was never available within the Government of Canada, certainly not in the Canadian Armed Forces in the past, and it has actually been very helpful. And we've now have people that are not just getting served, but we're having investigations that I would humbly submit would not have happened had we not had the center. So we still have a lot of work to do, but I think it was a good start. Jennifer?
In terms of your question to me, I certainly have tremendous support from within the Canadian Armed Forces, but at the same time, one of the things that we've been praised for is that we've asked for help. We have gone to external subject matter experts. We've gone to other militaries and other institutions because, sadly, we are not the only ones dealing with this issue. So we are drawing upon resources and considering use of expertise, whether it's commercial training programs or proven resources. We're also establishing an external advisory council to be able to bring that knowledge to us and constantly looking for people who have the knowledge that we lack.
Thank you for that. I'm going to give the floor over to Mr. Ryu. You have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important to note the work that you are doing because it is certainly a very difficult task that you have to bring about a cultural change. And I'm happy to see that the constituency of Saint-Jean is taking part in the solution. I'd like to refer to the report. On the 1st of February 2016, following the recommendations by Justice Madame Deschamps, it is noted here that there has been good progress in the execution of the Operation Honor project. But it is said that notwithstanding the difficult task of bringing about a cultural change in an institution, I'd like to know whether you can give some examples of this sort of negative aspect that may result in cultural change.
Change. Sir, I can only submit that changing the culture of this behavior can only breed positive aspects and positive results. If people can't, men or women, can't live or abide by what we determine to be honesty and respect and dignity for all persons, then I would submit that they probably don't belong representing our country in uniform. I offer that as a comment. There are a number of challenges that we have discussed with Madame Deschamps. Culture change is just one of them. And because of that, such a large challenge, getting people to report is a very closely aligned second issue, that challenge that we're bringing. And then we're trying to create the environment where people trust which is a very large word right now, trust that all of the people that surround them, military, civilian, predominantly military men and women in their chain of command, are going to do the right thing should they discern to come forward. Our other challenge is really momentum. We have a momentum now. We need to maintain that momentum as we go forth in the years to come.
OK. Est-ce que ça peut être...
I'm interested in knowing that they may have been hard or unappealing for certain people because it might have been difficult for them to define what sexual misconduct is exactly.
Sorry, I didn't catch the first question.
Est-ce que dans le... On a parlé...
There was reference made about the unpleasant aspect or the difficult aspect of understanding what exactly is meant by sexual misconduct. Is it because that there are people are unable to define what exactly is meant by sexual misconduct?
A good question, sir. In fact, one of the recommendations from Madame Deschamps was to really clean up our definitions, to make it easier to understand, but not only that, to put them all resident in one policy, or at least unify them so that people aren't searching all over the place for different policies and different definitions. As a military member, my definition of sexual harassment, for example, is different than my public service colleagues. My definition of a sexual harassment is harassment that occurs regardless where I am, on the sports field, in the grocery store, at work, or on deployment. Whereas sexual harassment at the workplace for my public service colleagues will be something that happened in the workplace. So we need to ensure that nuance that we need to create for our own military members is resonant and well understood by every single man and woman in uniform. The fact that we said understanding is an important part of our action plan. Also, people understand what it means to be sexual misconduct. They understand the difference between right and wrong. But it really is understanding what can we do about it, what are the best practices around the country and externally, what facilities or as Jen Bennett has mentioned, what other organizations or rape crisis centers, for example, can help us determine the best way forward in order to meet this insidious need, and so that we can take all of the good things and put it within our action plan so we're not starting from time zero. So there's a huge understanding that we need to know as well about how to eradicate this behavior, not necessarily the behavior itself.
Could I add? It wasn't just defining the types of behavior, it was the scope and the range to ensure that people understood that this spans not just with offenses against the criminal code, but down to comments in the workplace, or as one of the members mentioned, inappropriate jokes, comments, offhanded. So one of our challenges from the outset was to describe the scope and the range of the type of behaviors and actions that we were describing. There's also a change in the vocabulary in Canadian society, and so we're running into challenges with words like bystander. While we do bystander intervention training, the word bystander implies standing by. So an interesting conversation is happening in larger society about how do we empower people to take action. As well, the Government of Canada now moving to a violence in the workplace strategy that will include the span of activities that we're addressing under our work and Operation Honor. So it is evolving as well in society about the language that we're using, and so we're following that very closely.
That's the time. Thank you for the response. And Mr. Miller, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Admiral Bennett, General Whitecross, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your service to Canada. And congratulations on your new appointment, General. I think that's fantastic. In reading your report, it seems to be, if you read it there, that the amount of reported incidents is rising, but I believe there's probably a fair percentage of that is more due to people finally realizing that, hey, the military is serious about this, cleaning this up, and they're reporting more. Is there any kind of a breakdown that you can give on that? You know, like, is it actually more incidents, or is it more of the older stuff?
Thank you, sir. So the reality is we don't have stats from previous stats from years ago The Stats Canada survey will give us a baseline from here on in, and that'll be available in November. But intuitively, we knew that as we created the environment for people to come forward, that we would have an increase in reporting. And our allies mentioned that as well. Be prepared, they said, to get more reports in the first number of years as you are going down this road, because people will test the system. They will want to make sure that what you're saying you're actually going to do. So we're in that phase right now of people coming forward. And I would venture to say not everyone has come forward. There are still a lot of challenges in encouraging people to report. And one of the benefits of having the center is they don't have to start a report. They don't have to have an investigation. They can just seek any of the help that they need in order to get over what had happened, or at least in order to face what has happened to them. And in some cases, thank goodness, they get that confidence level and that trust, and they actually start a report, and they actually start the investigation, and we can address the issue of the perpetrators or the alleged offenders, which I think is really good. But the reality is we don't have the stats for the past. A number of people that have come forward are also coming forward on historical issues, so things that have happened in the past. And we've got this right from the beginning when we went out on our town halls, of people wanting to tell us what happened to them 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago, so that because they haven't got over it. And then we're also trying to facilitate the help that they need.
Well, I think that the fact that, they haven't got over it, obviously people are scarred for life on that. But the fact that they feel confident coming forth, I think reinforces my own thoughts that I have no doubts that this, that the military is trying to clean this up, and I do give you credit for that. I noticed in your report here that there seems to be higher cases, I believe it was 27 or 28% of cadets or new recruits. Why is that, if the culture is changing, or we hope it's changing, are you concerned about that number, or is there a specific reason why in the new recruits that number seems to be so high? Can you comment on that?
I would also go back to the fact that we didn't have stats before, but there is an increase. So a couple of comments there. Cadets and officer cadets are two completely different things. I just want to make sure that we're aligned here. So the cadet program is youth programs, 18 and under. Officer cadets are new officers coming into the military college system. And we are creating the environment, I believe, that they're more, we start right at the recruiting centers now. And we talk about it, and we say that this behavior won't be put up with. And right at the CFLRS, the Leadership and Recruit School in Saint Jean, we have the instructors have brand new training that they've gone through, including the instructors at the Canadian military colleges and the leadership folks there. And we talk about it, and we ensure that for all of the new recruits that this is behavior you don't have to put up with. So I believe that has a lot to do with the fact that people are coming forward.
Okay, we like to think, and I hope we can trust that the mood or the thought has changed in society about the misconduct, about sexual harassment. And do you feel that you're seeing that in your new cadets, new recruits in general?
I would say yes, sir. And I'll just anecdotally, at the recruit school just in the last month, a report came up of a recruit that felt uncomfortable for behavior that happened from one of the staff, and it was dealt with immediately. And that recruit is still with us. I'm sure, anecdotally, though we don't have the stats, that some recruits would have left because of that kind of behavior. But because they're seeing that the leadership at the leadership school in Saint Jean are doing things about it at the moment, immediately, that they're remaining and they're getting the support that they need. I believe that has a lot to do with the education. I would just preface that to say we're not where we need to be. We still have a lot of work to do, but I am comforted that we're making gains.
Okay, well, keep up the good work on it, and I trust that you're headed in the right direction.
Thank you, sir.
That's it.
Thanks for the question and the
Can I just
response.
add to your first question, sir, that over the year that the SMRC has been open, we've had 29 investigations opened as a result of people calling the centre and being transferred that we wouldn't have had before. So I think we're having those indications as well about confidence in somebody reaching out first to a counsellor and then going to the military police. And I would add to the discussion in your later questions that, like society, we still struggle, and one of the members mentioned earlier about people coming in with a different set of values and norms. But it's important that we establish right from the beginning about what is acceptable and what isn't. But we are dealing with young people who are finding their way and coming in with different values.
Thanks, Admiral.
Mr. Fisher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and as other members have said, it's an honor to have you here today, so thank you very much for coming. I'd like to talk about post-complaint reintegration of victims. Can you just outline a little bit about some of the success of the reintegration? Is there an ostracization? Is there a feeling of inclusion still there, or would you suggest that there's some problems reintegrating back into the...
Sorry, sir, are you speaking the alleged offender or the victim?
Victim. The
victim.
The victim's reintegration
Right.
post-complaint.
Okay, so the reality is, and Madame Deschamps described this, characterized it, where men and women who have been victimized are ostracized when they go forward for a whole bunch of the wrong reasons, in my humble opinion. We're trying to turn that around. Not that we're stating that we need to ostracize the alleged offender, but we need to rally around the victim. And General Vance made that very clear, and I know my colleagues, the commanders of the Army, Air Force, and Navy, are also fundamentally on line with that we need to ensure that we give the support emotionally, intellectually, mentally, chain of command, trust everything, and rally around the victim as a priority. That's what we're trying to do. But it's difficult for them to feel like they can go back in their work environment. It all depends on how we've treated the alleged offender. Knowing that he or she is due diligence is required as well for them, but we need to ensure that we turn that around, which has not necessarily been the case in the past. So we are working on that.
Do you have any examples of success, or do you have any feeling that it's working, or do you...
Yeah, go ahead.
So we are integrating our victim support not just to encourage the reporting, but through the process. So one example of that is that we do have a single point of contact for the military police assigned to the SMRC, so that for a victim, they don't have to repeat their story to numerous people, depending on when they call. So that is being extended through the military justice system as well, so that the Director of Military Prosecution is now giving priority to sexual-related offenses so that they are tried much more quickly. So the same prosecutor is assigned, again, helping that victim to understand the process and have consistency of the treatment there. Our support services as well, we're increasing the awareness and the education of our support workers so that they understand the impact of trauma, and we'll extend that back into the unit level in the communities, much as we've done with mental health initiatives, so that we better understand what that person is going through and how we can support them. Our greatest challenge still, though, is in very small units, or on board a ship or on an operation where it is a very small and close community. So we are looking also in our judicial system about community impact statements, beyond victim impact statements, about sharing with the community the impact of that. So we are borrowing from some of our other initiatives, from mental health in particular, looking at how do we reintegrate and how do we assist and continue members who've been affected by trauma of this nature.
Okay, well, I certainly appreciate the effort is there. I perhaps in the future we'll be able to see whether there's a success or whether there's, a win in this. General, you spoke about the sexual offense response teams launched on Tuesday. Then you stated every report of a sexual offense, new or historical, will be investigated independent of Operation Honor. And then you mentioned the military judicial processes. So I wonder if you could just sort of outline is there a separation between the military judicial processes and Operation Honor, and maybe outline what that looks like, that separation? Are they running parallel, or are they running in collaboration? Is there a working together between those different processes?
So absolutely, sir. The judicial system and the military police system are outside the chain of command for very good reasons, as you can understand. They have very much taken on the recommendations from Madame Deschamps and the Operation Honor requirements, objectives, and they're looking within their organizations to see how they can support and ensure that they're working in concert with us. The SORT, the Sexual Offense Response Team, is one of these results of that collaboration. And here is military police, a part of the National Investigative Service, who have additional training on sexual offenses, so that they are far better trained to investigate and to their treatment of victims and the like, so that they're the only ones that are going to be dealing with this. They are highly trained instead of having an NIS or a National Investigative Service investigator that may be doing a number of other things. This will give us timely investigations, which is one of the issues that Madame Deschamps talked about. It will also give us the ability to create almost a subject matter expert in this area, unfortunately. But that's required in order to help out the victims in this. The same with the Director of Military Prosecutions through the military justice system. They're looking at ways to help facilitate, as Admiral Bennett has said, to help the victims through the process, only speaking to one person, only tell the story once. And in fact, the Director of Military Prosecutions must agree with the investigator that charges cannot or can be laid. In the past, they both had an ability to yea or nay, the military police, the investigator, or the Director of Military Prosecutions. Now there has to be one point. And these are the sorts of things that we've brought on. There's a number of other initiatives that are just being started, the court-martial review as well, and a number of other ones that are happening. But we're very much working in collaboration.
Do I have any more time?
No, you're out of time. I think we'll have time at the end so we can circle back. Just to close off the formal timed questions, Mr. Garrison, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Well, I left off talking about families on base. I just want to say I was very glad to hear of the greater cooperation between the military police and civilian authorities, because I've seen one particularly egregious historical case where that cooperation did not take place, and it's left the victim to this day without the justice that they're seeking. So that's another very positive thing, I think, that you're working on. And the extra training for military police in sexual assault is very, very important. So congratulations on that. I'm not sure what we do about some of those historic injustices, but that's to deal with in another forum. Again, as I said, I understand your emphasis on serving members. So I have 3 quick questions I'll try to ask here. One is about civilian employees. In my riding, I have just as many civilian employees of DND as I do serving members, and they're often in mixed workplaces. So how have you been dealing with that question of those mixed workplaces? Second is reservists. The Auditor General has, and I have just as many reservists as I have the other categories. The Auditor General has expressed some concerns about training for reservists, and I wonder if that also applies to the training in sexual misconduct. And the third and last is peacekeeping deployment. There's certainly been a reduction in peacekeeping training within the Canadian military, and I wonder whether those about to be deployed on new missions you're confident they're getting the training they need in terms of sexual misconduct with civilian populations abroad.
Okay, sir, if I may, I'll take the last one first, because it's actually a fairly easy question. Thank you. Sorry, I don't mean to call it easy. It's a very difficult question. But the peacekeeping, anyone that goes off on deployments, whether it's peacekeeping or NATO deployments or the like, do get additional training when it comes to cultural, depending on where they're going. But they also get the gender, war, peace, and security, UNSCR 1325 training, and how gender issues going into theater of operations. So yes, absolutely, there is training. It will get better as we progress. In terms of civilians and reservists, so we are working hand in hand with the ADM for HR for civilians, so Mr. Kim Choi, in ensuring that our policies are aligned. So I know Admiral Bennett on our behalf, and then a member of his staff, they're working very much not just in harassment issues, but in the whole well-being of members in the department, so military and civilian, reservists, contractors, all peoples, so that we're dealing with not just what I would say the harder social issues as we're discussing today, but right through to, a pressure in the workplace, stress relief, resilience training, all that kind of stuff, so that we can have a more comprehensive approach to all members of the defense team. And I know that Admiral Bennett is very much seized in the work we're doing there. And that is very much aligned with reservists. We don't characterize reservists as anybody different than a military member. So whether you are, on reserve duty, on full call-out duty, or a regular force member, the expectations as a member of the military are the same.
I can add some specifics on training there. So again, with the pre-deployment training, there is a greater effort now on the women, peace and security, gender considerations on operations. We have assigned gender advisors to all of the operational commanders, and they will deploy when we go on operations. We're not alone in that. It is both a NATO and a UN initiative, and at the forefront of nations in those two alliances. In terms of reserve training, and the engagement in Operation Honour, it is for all Canadian Armed Forces members. And while there may be differences in the delivery to Canadian Rangers and those in the Cadet Organization Administration Training Service or the primary reserve, all Canadian Armed Forces members are engaged in this training. And it is being developed for particular use at the local level and at the unit level, so the resources are readily available, and not just for full-time members, also for part-time.
Thank you. So we're done our kind of scheduled questioning. I know there's still other questions out there, so I'd like to go around the group again. I'm going to try and limit these to 5 minutes so we can make sure everyone gets an equitable amount of time. I'm going to start off with Ms. Ellslev. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm wondering if you could shed some light on how this program is being incorporated into the overall Women in the Military program, in particular around officers. Sometimes culture change also comes through leadership and perhaps the ability to attract and retain and have women in leadership positions. What kind of progress are we making in terms of the percentage of women officers in senior leadership positions, particularly in operational roles, MOCs?
Thanks very much for that. So the General Vance has made it very clear we're to grow by 1% per year for the next 10 years to make our 25% target that was given to us by the Human Rights Commission, Canadian Human Rights Commission, which quite honestly is where we need to be. We're at 15% right now. About the same for officers as NCMs. Some occupations far higher in terms of percentage than others, as you can appreciate. So the more non-traditional have smaller number versus the traditional occupations. We need to get rid of that lexicon, non-traditional versus traditional, and we need to start speaking about military occupations as they're meant to be, which is gender neutral or parity, whichever word you choose. So there is a lot of work that is happening on that. We have first Canadian Armed Forces diversity strategy just been developed this year to help take us out in more an enduring process. We're working very hard with the recruiting centers to ensure that we're getting more women in for all the good reasons. And including encouraging men, women of visible minorities and Aboriginals to self-identify, so that we can ensure that we have the right numbers of people within the Canadian Armed Forces that actually meet our diversity numbers. There's a lot of work, comprehensive work being done on training and education, on the recruiting, but more so on the retention. Women tend to get out at particular moments of their life for very good reasons, whether it has to do with family, whether it has to do with geographical stability and the like. We need to create the environment where they feel as though they can remain in the Canadian Armed Forces and we meet their needs, their personal needs, so that they can remain as members. Mm-hmm. So we're going, Admiral Bennett and I are examples of this. Public opinion research shows that women don't really understand what it means to be in the military, women in the Canadian society. Very small number of them seem to resonate with the military life. And the reasons are they don't believe you can have a family, they don't believe you can have success, you can go into any occupation, and we need to get that word out. So we're working very much on a far more comprehensive marketing strategy that didn't exist in the past.
And specifically women in leadership, senior officer positions, are you also measuring that as well?
Absolutely. This is the first time in the history of the Canadian Armed Forces we have 7 female general and flag officers.
And that's out of how many?
About 100. No, absolutely, no taken, ma'am. I get it. I get it. She gets it.
Could I add, in addition to my roles with the Strategic Response Team, I'm the champion for women in defence. And we are working quite extensively on the premise of seeing is believing. And so having our junior officers who have operational experience and who are representing the next generation has been very important and very critical to us. And the way that they speak and they represent themselves is quite different than General Whitecross and I, who experienced that transition period. But people do need to see themselves in these careers, and they need to understand, especially for that operation. So we have some wonderful examples that we're utilizing as our spokespeople to get out visibly to show that it can be done.
And thank you very much for the privilege of being able to ask you these questions.
Thank you very much.
That's all I have.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Apollos, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to come back to the case. The fact that there has been an increase in the number of cases of assault and misconduct. Yeah, there is an analysis that will be available in October, investigation to what is taking place we'll have a better idea of what the nature of the problem is in the various services. But what I'm interested in knowing is whether at the present time you've already anticipated changing conditions of service. By that I mean we know that in our deployment in Afghanistan or with the UN, there were certain obligations relating to sexual relationships. A military couple not entitled, for example, to have relations during deployment. Certain observation posts, for example, with an infantry section, there may be 8 men and 1 woman. They are together 24 hours out of 24 in a very remote location. In these situations, everyone is supposed to be treated by equal, but nature being what it is, it becomes difficult. Do you think that the services in general will be rethinking the way in which these operations are conducted and will have a new view, for example, of this question of relations?
In terms of the survey, it'll be out at the end of November, and it will give us a baseline of the last year. 2 things. It will give us an idea of, since Operation Honor started, what is the general knowledge and what has happened, and then prior to Operation Honor. So that'll be the end of November. In terms of the deployed policies, when it comes to personal relationships, we will look at all of our HR, military HR policies for everything in the months and years to come, to put a gender-based analysis on it, and to ensure that it meets the Women, Peace and Security UNHCR 1325 requirements. Having said that, I do not espouse by human nature men and women will get together. As military members, the expectation is that they will follow orders. And if it means that there will be no relationship while on deployment, then that's exactly what they will do. And we need to ensure that that is maintained, because that's the policy and that's the expectation. Now, when you're speaking about married couples, I happen to know of married couples that have been deployed at the same time. There is always a risk in deploying married couples, as you're probably aware. One of them being, if they have children, you should really make sure that one of them's in Canada. But the other thing is, they do have the allowance to do their travel at the same time if the operational climate can handle it. But again, the rules are clear. But having said that, all of the policies will be relooked at in the months and years to come. Thank you, sir.
You have more time if you want.
Actuellement, dans le
At the present time, among the number of complaints that you've received, I'd like to know whether you're in a position to conduct an evaluation, whether it's been mainly cases of a superior aggressing a subordinate. Do you have any information, figures of this type? Would it could be a military of the same rank or a subordinate in relation to a superior? A sergeant with a corporal or whatever.
Je comprends votre question un peu mieux maintenant. Il y a une politique qu'on appelle les relations.
Not just define it, but ensure that it is very clear that whoever is the senior in a senior in the relationship, whether it's a sergeant and a corporal or a colonel and a private, doesn't matter. The senior member of that relationship must identify that relationship to his or her seniors the minute it starts or before. If they do not, it will be determined to be an adverse personal relationship, and that senior member will be held to account.
Just a reminder, you guys can split time, but I think there was somebody, Mr. Spigman, you wanted to, another question?
Yep, please.
Okay.
Thank you,
Floor is
Mr.
yours.
Chair. I may not need the whole 5 minutes. One of the comments that I think the committee was struck with, and probably Canadians at large, was the conclusion by you that this is going to take a long time. And many people have echoed you on that point, and some people even saying this is a generational problem. So I'm just searching my mind for potential accelerators in terms of how can we make this happen faster. In society at large, we've got all kinds of things going on. We've got the He for She campaign. We had Emma Watson up on the Hill just yesterday. And I wanted to circle back to two comments by my colleagues. The first comment by Ms. Alislev, which was basically that men need to step up and do their part. And the comment by my colleague, Mr. Bazan, that middle management in the armed forces needs to play or could play a stronger role. So if I could invite each of you to sort of speculate for one or two force multipliers, accelerators that would sort of bring us downside of the horizon of this taking a generation to fix. If you had carte blanche and you had two issues that you could change tomorrow within the toolkit that you have, or maybe even outside of it, what would they be?
I think the Canadian Armed Forces or any military has this thing called a chain of command. And it is a very powerful tool in ensuring that not only do we make mission success, but that orders are followed. And I would submit that a fundamental understanding by every member of the chain of command, which is what we're attempting to achieve, and I believe we've made some progress there, of what it means to treat everybody with fair and with dignity and respect, will go a long way in order to effect change as fast as it can. I would also submit the middle managers, the people that are front and center with the men and women in uniform on a day in and day out basis. They are the ones, I believe, that can effect change as fast as possible. So the faster that we can effect or have them acknowledge and push this issue forward, I think the organization as it is can actually push forward.
Is there an incentive system maybe grafted onto Operation Honor or in parallel with it that would reinforce men who step up and defend women who are being subject to harassment and abuse?
So we're just starting that. And in fact, I'll just give you a quick anecdote. Three senior officers standing around, three junior officers standing around, and a woman comes by, and one is about to make an off-color joke. So one of the officers there says, "That's intolerable behavior," leaves with the woman. I find out about it. So acknowledge to the person's chain of command, thank you for doing the right thing. Sent him a personal note. And I know Admiral Bennett is working on what's the honorable?
Operation Honor, honorable mentions.
Operation honorable mentions. It's difficult for an engineer to say. And it's to identify those who are doing the right thing. And there are many. But to let them acknowledge that the great work they're doing.
That's helpful.
It is helpful. Thank you.
I would preface my remarks by saying that our challenge remains that we don't have a stagnant population in which to deal with this. We have new recruits continually joining and bringing their sets of values and their experience from society. And so we are really dealing with a huge generational shift and a consistent turnover from people who have lived through transition to people who are just joining now. So that is one of our challenges in not being able to do this quickly, because we need to affect change across so many generations there. I would say that one thing that is helpful and that we could do more of it is that greater awareness by Canadians in general about the severity and the impact of this. And so I think we have some challenges sometimes in being able to understand the impact, not just on the victim, but on the organization. And we're doing that through discussing about the impact on our operational efficiency and our teamwork and sort of our raison d'etre. And so I think that as society comes to term with this and we stop focusing on very high-profile court cases and the results, but we look more holistically at the issues and what this means to our society and to perpetrators, to victims, to us as institutions and individuals, I think that would be very important and helpful for us, because, again, members of the Canadian Armed Forces are Canadian citizens and represent Canadian values. So what we do outside the military has a great impact for us. I think the other is that we do need some time. There is a great deal of focus on this, a great deal of pressure, because we are held to such a high account. And I think for us, small victories mean a great deal. And sometimes we forget to celebrate. And as General Whitecross mentioned, we spend an awful lot of time looking at correcting the bad behavior instead of rewarding the good behavior and what right looks at like. So we need to remind people about that.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Mr. Bazan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Admiral Bennett, with your experience working with the reserves, has there been any analysis done to see whether or not sexual misconduct is at a different level in the reserve force versus Red Force?
So the Statistics Canada survey will indicate that, and we've asked for statistics to be broken down. The participants of the survey were regular force and primary reserve members, so we will have an indication that will help us to understand as well the differences between reservists serving part-time at the unit and the community level versus those on full-time service that are more closely aligned with the regular force. So that's our most recent data. We have done harassment surveys, and we've done some specific work with the reserve to research retention, why people leave, the climate within the reserve force. But certainly the Statistics Canada will be the first time that we've captured data specific to harmful and inappropriate sexual behavior.
The only reason I ask that, because you think about our reservists, that they have their regular employment outside of the reserves, and they could be in career fields where they don't have opportunities to interact with the opposite sex or people of the LGBTQ community. So they're I just wonder if there might be some bias amongst them or inappropriate behavior because of their other experiences that they have where they don't have that type of interaction.
So the demographics of the reserve force are generally more diverse, and because of exposure with the civilian community, sometimes a very different perspective and a level of tolerance as well. At the same time, we do have a challenge with the reserve force in terms of reporting and jurisdiction, because we do live in both the civilian world and in the military world, and of course offences that would occur in the civilian community versus those that are on DND property. But we are looking very closely at that. Also looking in the reserve force, the demographics, you have a lot of younger people, a lot of students, and people who join for a very short time. So looking at catering our training and our programs of awareness a bit differently for that community.
So just to go on a follow-up when I was speaking earlier, when you look at the strategic response team that you lead and whether or not you have the tools it require, and there is an increase in reporting, a lot of it historical, and a lot of people feeling safer, they're coming forward now, and a lot of people testing the waters. Do you have enough resources? Is there more tools that you need in your toolbox to do your job, such as more regulation or legislation that us as parliamentarians could assist with? And also whether or not the JAG and military police have the tools, if there has been an increase in the number of investigations that they have to commit to and then also prosecute.
Go ahead.
So the answer is that yes, we have sufficient resources, and when we need resources, there hasn't been a question about having access to those because of the high priority of this. We do have again the opportunity to call upon civilian expertise. The military police are augmenting their expertise by doing their training with allies, with civilian police force, with agencies who have that training and the expertise. And the addition of the 18 additional investigators, that's increased the complement within the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service. So we are augmenting. The Director of Military Prosecutions, again, is doing a great deal more training than they have traditionally done, specific to this. And where they don't have the resources internally, they are drawing upon external communities there. I do think that in terms of victim advocacy and having victims have a voice, there is an opportunity for us and as well for you as the government to be able to look from that perspective about how we assist in that regard.
You still got time?
You got a little bit of time,
Okay. I guess on the survey that you had Statistics Canada do, 40,000 members were surveyed, both primary reserve and reg force. Also, I'm hoping that you had large enough samples both from Air Force, Navy, and Army. What were the type of questions that they were asking, just so we have an idea what the survey entailed?
So it's a space and time survey. So they wanted to know your awareness of Operation Honor after August of 15 when General Vance made it an order, your understanding of it, what it meant, and whether or not you've been exposed to any type of sexual misconduct during that period, as well as anything before that. So a baseline information set from the years prior to August of 15, and then something in order to identify whether or not there was any other behavior after August of 15. So a time and space, very much. It did identify Army, Air Force, Navy, different rank levels, geographic space across the country. Some of the questions were very specific, and some were a little bit more vague. So in the analysis, when the folks will do the analysis between now and the end of November when it's made public, we'll have a better idea of what is the baseline that they've identified.
In addition, some of the questions were very specific about types of behavior and then the follow-up on that. So did you report this? Did you feel comfortable reporting? If you didn't, why or why not? Were you satisfied with the results? So a wide range of questions. We needed that information first to determine a baseline of prevalence of incidents as well as the type of incidents. And that information will be used to help us to influence training, education, awareness, and our action plan. Are we addressing the right level? Are we looking at, is it reporting that's an issue? Is it retaliation? Is it, what are the issues specific? And because we had such a high response rate and a very representative sample across both the regular force and the primary reserve, we expect that those results will be very useful to us.
Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to be quick here. I'm interested in the mandate of Operation Honor. My understanding was it was basically to the 10 recommendations of Madame Deschamps. Is it broader than that? Because you did speak about, in your comments, you spoke about not limited to these. So can you maybe just quickly outline some of the other things in Operation Honor outside of those 10 recommendations?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Chair, it includes Madame Deschamps' 10 recommendations, but it goes further than that. And in fact, as we're developing more of the institutional, whether it's policies, training, education, surveys, or performance measurements and the like, we are adjusting Operation Honor in new areas. We call them fragos or fragmentation orders that add to what we're doing. And a lot of that has to do as well with reporting. So we're having all of the Army, Air Force, Navy, and the Special Ops and myself as a
what you're
force.
Hearing.
Yeah, to tell people what it is. And then we need to take that information in addition to what the response center finds, and then make the work that we're doing even better. So it really is very much all-encompassing.
Gotcha. That's very helpful. Thank you. So one short snapper. Rear Admiral, you mentioned, I think it was you that mentioned the fitness levels now, the standards are the same between men and women. Are you getting any complaints that isn't being practiced? Or are you getting any complaints that it is being practiced?
It's hard. I'll give you that. Well, I mean, that's my area. So as one of my responsibilities, no, the answer is no. It's being done because that's the decision that we've made as a senior leadership. And I think it speaks spades about our ability to treat people the same. And it's not just men and women. It's regardless of your age. Okay, so my birthday was yesterday, and I'm now on the other side of 50. And I'm 5'2" on a really good day. And it's a tough test. But I agree that this is the way we need to be.
When we rolled it out, we did have concerns, and so I used that opportunity in my role as the champion for women to introduce women to the test, let them have a chance to understand it. We are well prepared for the test as well. There are training programs that are designed for people of all shapes and sizes and ages and genders. And we, as we rolled this out, I think fear was the greatest challenge of people thinking, can I do this? One of the advantages of a common standard is that everyone understands, so that when you are deployed on operations, you don't separate out by, you can only lift this amount and you can only do these things. We understand that we've all met the same standard.
We'd be happy to give you an opportunity to try the test.
I often use the example, and this is a bit of an aside now, I tell young male hockey players to play like female hockey players.
They're fast.
It's very difficult to hold yourself up to the standards of, say, the Canadian female Olympic team and the things that they've been able to accomplish with the Canadian soccer team. So it's interesting. I just appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I think that's pretty much it for the questions. I want to thank you both for coming. You are charged with a difficult but very necessary task, and it's evident by your testimony today that the CDS chose the right people for the job. So thank you very much. I'm going to suspend for about 5-6 minutes so we can say our goodbyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
you.